McLaren had yet another devastating weekend in Shanghai, where they failed to start the race with both of their drivers, and Norris and Piastri were very frustrated with this development of events. These two have gone on to publicly bash McLaren for their mistakes, and after the team statement, it's safe to say that the tensions are the highest they've ever been. But with some infamous similarities being recognized this year compared to the previous one, are McLaren still playing the favoring game, or are they genuinely falling apart because of the car's issues? I don't think I need to tell you how painful it is to be a McLaren fan right now. Both Norris and Piastri failed to start the race, with Norris not even being able to make it to the warm-up lap due to an electronics issue. To make matters worse, Piastri was pulled into the garage just seconds before he was poised to place his car on the grid, and what was supposed to be a comeback race after missing his home GP in Australia turned out to be another disaster for Oscar. He is yet to compete in one Sunday's lap in this season, and the Australians' frustrations are growing with every weekend passing by, but that same frustration was maintained by Lando Norris as well. The 2025 world champion couldn't accept the fact that he is not going to start the race because of a persisting issue. And now that both Ferrari and Mercedes are way ahead, we tend to believe that McLaren might be satisfied with a P3 stance in the Constructors' Championship if they manage to climb there. Elaborating further on the failure in Shanghai, Norris said, "I don't know how long these issues have been going for, honestly. Sometimes it's better to leave them just to crack on with things, but I found out 20 minutes before I was meant to go out of the garage. But I think they've been working on things for a little while already. There was some electrical issue with the power unit, and therefore I wasn't even able to start it. It's a shame. My first non-start in F1, which is sad, but even worse that it's a double DNS with Oscar as well." The disappointment was also present in Norris's voice, as he wasn't afraid to express it publicly and double down on his belief that the 2026 regulations are all but good for the sport. Adding further to this, he said, "I'm just disappointed, that's all. I'm disappointed I didn't get to go and do my job today. I'm frustrated for the whole team. It's not just me. The mechanics, everyone puts a lot of work into things, and it's just a complicated bit of kit. There are a lot of new things and some new issues that we're still finding out about at times. For everyone in the garage, they're disappointed we couldn't get the car out on track today, and they'll work hard to try and fix. As a defending champion, it's very hard for you to start the season the way that Norris did, but it's obvious that McLaren's issues are going to persist for a while. What's even more frustrating is that Mercedes seems to be on top of the regulations in every area, with Ferrari being the closest competitor, and McLaren are using Mercedes' engines. It's silly to believe that they're going to receive every specification from the Silver Arrows regarding the ICE component, but either way, the difference shouldn't be that high if you're a team that's coming from a championship winning season in both categories. And what about Oscar Piastri? The fact that he was withdrawn from the races just seconds after he was supposed to be on his grid place has woken up certain fears in our minds. Is McLaren still prioritizing Lando? Is this one of those Lando didn't start the race, so you cannot start it either type of scenarios? I firmly choose not to believe so because of all the mistakes that McLaren has done in the previous season when they were highly competitive. But either way, Oscar's frustration is growing higher and higher. Elaborating further on the Shanghai GP, Piastri said, "It was all fine on the way to the grid. I think the problem was similar to Norris's, an electrical issue on the power unit, but it's not the same electrical issue. So that is obviously disappointing, but it is what it is. It's been a while since I've watched two GPs on TV. Obviously, this one is a bit different. Last week was pretty rough to take, but unfortunately, these kinds of things happen in racing at times, especially at the beginning of a new regulation set. It's probably not a huge surprise. It's just a shame that this has happened to both cars at the same time." Throughout qualifying, McLaren has shown a very promising pace and a much bigger improvement from Melbourne. They were poised to have at least one car to fight for a podium, and whether we like it or not, they can be a huge factor in the pecking order in 2026. But for that to happen, they need a reliable car, not one that they are not sure whether it would be able to compete in a race 20 minutes before the event. McLaren was quite disappointed with how things developed with both Norris and Piastri, and in a statement, the Woking Base squad said, "Unfortunately, we identify separate issues on both cars that prevented them from starting the Chinese GP, with Oscars being removed from the grid shortly before the formation lap. We will now work to identify each issue." The thing that worries us the most is the fact that McLaren was looking quite competitive throughout the entire weekend, and then all of a sudden the cars aren't ready for Sunday's race. This is something that has been pointed out by Ted Kravitz as well, who stated the importance of the fact that the issues were separated, meaning they had nothing to do with each other. That is also something that McLaren needs to worry about, because it's practically two headaches, not one, that caused the misery in Shanghai. Elaborating further on this, Kravitz said two completely different issues. They are related to the power unit, a completely random set of circumstances. They were fine in qualifying, fine in the sprint race, a complete coincidence. You know, I know what you're thinking. Don't they have the same engines as Mercedes? Surely the deficit can't be that big. As I mentioned earlier in this video, it would be naive to believe that Mercedes are going to share every detail with McLaren. And Toto Wolff has actually spoken on the big deficit that we've seen between his team and McLaren. According to the Austrian, there are certain things that McLaren are doing very different compared to his drivers, as he elaborated. Everybody has a different concept. Also with the McLaren, without going into the detail, they have taken some decisions that are very different from ours when it comes, for example, to gear ratios. So that could have been good or could have been bad. And now a big question comes in. Is McLaren actually ready to compete in 2026? There is no doubt that these cars are going to see massive improvements over time, especially when the European part of the calendar comes in. But there is one big blow for the Woking Base squad. Two races have just been scrapped due to the Middle East escalations, Saudi Arabia and Bahrain. This means two fewer races to gather data, and two fewer races to potentially capitalize on a situation in your own advantage and close the gap to the front runners. But if I'm being honest, I don't think that McLaren is in that league right now. With all due respect, coming as 2025 champions in the constructors category comes with its own burden. And so far, McLaren is failing to live up to the hype. But if you were to ask Andrea Stella, the team principal of McLaren, as to where the problem is with the car, he'd have a very innovative response. There is one area in which McLaren excels, the traction and acceleration out of slower corners. But when it comes to the long straights, they just get obliterated by Mercedes. At least we were able to conclude this from the Australian GP. There is a significant gap between the power units that are being used by the Brackley and Woking Base squad, even though they are both Mercedes. And Andrea Stella believes that while that gap is a bit closed now, there is still plenty of room to work on, as he added, in Australia, 50% of the deficit to Mercedes was related to exploitation of the power unit, and the other 50% was grip in the corners. I think we have closed the gap a little bit from the power unit exploitation, but when it comes to the corners, the gap we have is pretty much similar to what we saw in Australia. This is related to not having enough aerodynamic load. There's obviously grip that you generate by using the tires in the right window, but I think we pretty much all understand how to use these tires in qualifying. So the qualifying is a good reference to see actually what the deficit is from an aerodynamic point of view. With all this in mind, do you think that Norris and Piastri are going to be in a position to compete for race wins sooner rather than later? Or do you think it's time to scrap the season and start from zero, even though we're just 2 races in? Let us know in the comments below.